When people around the world think of American food, they think of gross combinations of flavors and buckets of grease poured on it. Sadly, that's not necessarily false. It's not impossible to find a deep-fried stick of butter at a county fair, maybe even a burger dripping in fat. But the universal description of American cuisine is most likely a buffet. But how do they come to be? And more importantly, are they going to be popular after COVID? Or are we past the age of buffets?
Welcome to Spoonable Standpoint, the podcast where your hosts, Leo and Charlene, dig into food culture. In this episode, we'll be discussing the history of buffets, not just in America, but worldwide. Later, we'll discuss whether or not buffets can stay afloat in the post-COVID America, or if they will fade into obscurity. Are buffets destined for the history books, or are they still relevant? If they change their business models, could that help their fate? But first, how did buffets come to be?
Buffets are universally considered American. But strangely enough, pretty much everything about it isn't necessarily only American. To start, the name itself is French, which is why you'll hear the rare buffet some places. But what about them also isn't only American? Where they come from? So the obvious next question would be, where was the buffet created?
Across Europe, being able to have bites before you eat was extremely common. Charcuterie boards were a norm in many places and went by different names. But the version that would become the buffet was in Sweden, which was called the Brandvinsbord. They became popular in the 16th century and were a sign of hospitality. If someone stayed there, you would serve them a Brandvinsbord. Like a charcuterie, they had cheeses, breads, meats, alcohol, and the Scandinavian favorite, smoked and salted fish.
This was only an appetizer for whatever meal was served. But since it was so delicious, many people started to turn them into the full meals by the 18th century. This meal became known as a smorgasbord and consisted of similar foods to the Brandvinsbord, with hot and cold selection instead of just room temperature foods. At the time it became popular in Sweden, not many other countries took notice, which made it a delicacy for another century.
It wasn't until 1939 when it was introduced in America during the World's Fair in Queens, New York City. In the Swedish pavilion, the Three Crowns restaurant served a smorgasbord which blew everyone's mind away. Could it be possible that you could get whatever you wanted without needing to order 20 things off a menu? But for many Americans, the next question would be, where could I get one?
This question was asked for several years, but finally, in 1945, El Rancho Vegas, a casino on the soon-to-be Vegas Strip, opened. One of the workers, Herb McDonald, was working one night and hunger struck him. He went into the kitchen and took out whatever he could find, meats, cheeses, breads, anything. As he scarfed it down, patrons started to ask where they could get a spread like he had. At that moment, McDonald remembered the vital rule of Vegas: keep gamblers on the casino floor for as long as possible. If he gave people food, they didn't have to leave the casino, and they would just keep gambling.
Upon realization, he put out a spread for the gamblers. El Rancho Vegas most likely knew all about smorgasbords since they decided to invest in a buffet for the casino called the Buckaroo Buffet. But unlike smorgasbord, the buffet was all you could eat. In Sweden, taking piles and piles of food would be considered rude or at least not mature. But the Buckaroo Buffet didn't care. Only $1 to eat all you could want.
This would make the casino so much more popular and so much more lucrative. Yeah, they lost a ton of money on the buffet, since people would really eat all they could eat. But since people would eat and go and gamble for hours, the casino didn't lose much.
Over the next decades, buffets would only grow in popularity, reaching its height in the 80s. You could find a buffet everywhere at that time, and although not everyone loved them, most people went to at least one. Very quickly, it became an American tradition and was all over TV. Since the 80s, they've gotten less popular but are still extremely common, especially in hotels and casinos. But with the sneeze guard buffets, the question of our health is always brought up, especially for the past 18 months. Are buffets here to stay, or are they going to become a relic of the past post-COVID?
Many restaurants have been drastically affected by COVID, but the most interesting thing that's been affected, in my opinion at least, is not a single restaurant, but an entire industry of restaurants. And obviously, listeners know what we're talking about, buffets, if you haven't listened to the first few minutes of this. And post-COVID, buffets are going to have to, in my opinion, change a lot. Before COVID, health issues were a priority, and being able to address those health issues are a priority. But post-COVID, people want things to be a lot cleaner. The nice thing about COVID is it reminds people, hey, guess what? Washing your hands actually does something. Cleaning down surfaces after someone has been there does something. It helps you not get diseases that could kill you. So buffets are kind of like a petri dish, a giant petri dish, just infested with probably like a bunch of diseases. I don't think I've ever gone to a buffet, looked down at the stuff and been like, yeah, I'm sure that stuff has not been spit in. No, I'm sure it's all been tampered with in some form or another by some patron. So yeah, they have sneeze guards, but I've seen people like go under the sneeze guards. So health issues are something that need to be addressed. I know a lot of buffets recently have been taking steps to do this by using sneeze guards, by putting people at the stations, but how do you think, Charlene, buffets could change to address health issues and other issues that might arise after COVID?
I definitely agree that a lot of change needs to be made. I was reading like Reddit submissions and basically confessions from people who worked in buffets, and they have seen some things. I remember one user mentioned how they'd see people or like toddlers even licking the spoons and then putting them right back. And unfortunately, at a buffet where basically you can have unlimited food, a lot of people go a little overboard and end up like throwing up their entire meal, which is definitely not something you'd want to be around when eating. So yeah, changes can definitely be made, especially post-pandemic, as you've mentioned before. The implementation of sneeze guards in buffets, which, as you could probably tell by the name, prevents, particles and bacteria from getting in the food, was still a very recent invention, but the quarantine definitely has made it much more important for change to be made, much more urgent changes to be made, like how all of us had to adjust to work and go to school from home and things like that. It's kind of hard to find a way that buffets can kind of improve their sanitation without compromising the actual experience that everyone is coming back and going for.
Personally, I think a big way to address these health issues, and I've seen multiple articles that have talked about this, the way you make things healthier is not people serving themselves. If someone is there to be like, hey, what do you want, mashed potatoes? Yeah, here you go. Then that becomes a lot safer. Only one person is handling the utensils. And people aren't going to be licking the spoons, as you said, and putting them back in. Which, by the way, that's... yeah, people are like, how come COVID spread so quickly? Well, I'm sure it wasn't just toddlers doing that. But yeah, being able to have people stationed at each of the foods might be a great solution. And this one's a little bit more out there. I haven't seen this anywhere, so please tell me if this is a little bit weird. But I think a way that buffets could change would be to maybe make the prices a little bit higher, but have a serving part to the meal. Not just you getting up and getting your food, but being like, can I have this, can I have this, can I have this? Not all buffet places would do this, right? It requires having more staff and spending a lot more money on stuff. But I think doing this makes things a lot safer. I know that big buffet chains like Golden Corral have been doing takeout during COVID, which is super smart. I'm not really sure how those work. I doubt they're all you can eat, but I'm sure there's some element of being able to have a little bit of everything. Personally, that's how I think things can change. I think the first thing I said about servers being there is a little bit more in line with everything. But I think doing that, it makes it feel a little bit more like school lunch.
Yeah, I definitely gotta agree with the school lunch situation. I always remember them like giving us just, just the tiny portion of whatever was being served that day. But yeah, I don't think that idea is going to be sustainable. But because a main part of why these buffets are so cheap and so like attractive to customers are because you have the freedom of being able to put as much as you want in your plate as many times as you want, no judgment. With the person being there, the restaurant has a bunch of extra people to pay. And I mean, come on. I'm sure most people wouldn't want to be seen going back for their sixth portion of crab legs. Although it could be a good opportunity for restaurants to be able to portion some of their foods more like they want them to. Another solution that I was thinking of was actually an experience I had at a sushi buffet in New York City. How it worked was there wasn't like a giant, line of trays filled with food where you can get whatever you want. They gave you tickets where you could basically check off everything you wanted and they'd give it to you. And they'd be decent portions as well. And they always keep coming back and giving you more tickets so you can order basically as much as you want, as many times as you want, and you don't have contact with all the food that everyone else is touching. You do have to have waiters, but you're also getting basically as contactless as buffet food can get. You're still being able to have that experience of being able to order as much as you want, as many times as you want, and things like that. And another big problem of buffets is also food waste. When people say your eyes are bigger than your stomach, that definitely applies. Much more so with buffets. The place that I went to actually charges you for the food you don't eat. And I gotta say, that combined with how they sort of managed everything, I was like, whoa, this is this is pretty advanced compared to the other buffets I've been to.
I really like that idea. It's kind of like what I was saying before, but a more elegant way of saying it. Being able to have those like tickets or being like, here's what I want. Can I have it? Yes, here you go. And then the other part with paying for what you don't eat. I think that's also smart because we know in America, overeating is very easy. But I feel like you're right. Like having that serving element might scare some people away. Being able to go up to a buffet and give yourself 12 scoops of mashed potatoes, give yourself 5 pieces of fried chicken, and then a crap ton of mac and cheese is great because it's all delicious. But having to tell a server, hi, can I have 12 orders of mac? 12. 1, 2. Yes, 12. And can I have 5 pieces of fried chicken? And can I have just, a crap ton of mac and cheese? It feels a lot harder to say because the server's like, you want how much food? So there's some sort of like taboo to it. I'm a little bit having to be like, can I have this crazy amount of food? Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I think it could scare away a lot of customers. But buffet industry is worth $8 billion, which is a lot of money. But the fact that you and I have pretty bad things to say about it kind of shows that they need to change their image, especially post-COVID. If someone hears buffet and they think food contamination, that's not a great thing to think about. So I think for the industry to keep growing and keep being popular in America, even though it's not as popular as before, but stay at least somewhat relevant, they're going to have to very much change their image. Maybe not drastically to having servers, but maybe enough so it becomes a little bit cleaner. But the fact that you get to eat as much as you want, whenever you want, I think that also makes it harder to keep that image of health. Not just food health, but like fitness health. So I think it's all very difficult to figure out.
Yeah, I definitely agree that even though we've said so much bad stuff about buffets, about cross contamination and overeating and food waste, they're definitely such an important part of American culture. I don't think they would ever just fully go away. I'd like to compare it back to our episode on mall food, where even though malls kind of had their peak in like the 80s and 90s and are kind of dying off now, we are never going to forget them. They're still such an important part of American culture, and the bigger ones are still around and doing really well from what I've seen. And I'd like to just point out that malls and buffets have a lot in common. Probably the biggest American cultural trash fire would just be a mall, but like every individual store is a buffet. Like you have one with like weird pasta shapes, and gotta have like a breakfast cereal buffet as well, with all those options that we have now. And if we're gonna add to that, you definitely need to have a barbecue buffet too. That like needs a whole store dedicated to it with all the different varieties and cuts and toppings you can put on it. And of course, with all that meat, you're gonna also want to have meat alternatives like Impossible Burgers as well.
Yeah, and with all these American foods, you might want something a little bit more, not really exotic, but something that might satisfy some people, like instant ramen. And it would all be served with the health of customers in mind. So very much like, as we were saying before, by servers, kind of like it was school lunch. Now, the thing is, like, this kind of big cultural American trash fire would cost a lot of money, obviously. There would probably only be like one. And maybe they do food delivery every once in a while. It's like the area around them. But probably to get there, you'd have to like fly on a plane. Problem is, if you're going from too far, you might spoil your dinner or your lunch or hell, even your breakfast with some airplane food. And maybe you're going there for a party. Hey, for a little birthday party. Maybe there's a VIP section that has unlimited birthday cake or something. I don't know. But yeah, all in all, something like that, I think, would really be something for the textbooks for U.S. history. So some poor saps taking APUSH in 10 years are going to have to learn about the great American mall buffet that had every kind of food. But I personally hope that that isn't something for the history books. I hope it's something that future Americans will be able to not just enjoy, but be taunted by other countries. Like, other countries are like, look at these people with their buffets. Such idiots. Like, you've never been to a buffet. They're delicious, all right? Especially breakfast buffets. I've been to a few breakfast buffets, and oh, those are good. Waking up from a hotel to go get an unlimited continental breakfast. Mwah. Don't even get me started on that. But buffets, I hope they stay a part of our culture, but I think they could die out. What do you think, Charlene?
Well, to start off, I definitely want to say that if any of you guys see this pop up in like 10 years, I want you to remember Spoonable Standpoint. You heard it here first, so don't forget that. Anyway, but as the pandemic seems to be becoming kind of our new normal, it's imperative that restaurants and buffets have to change. As you mentioned before, Golden Corral doing delivery, and that other place that I mentioned before being basically as non-contact as possible. And this was before the quarantine even, so many industries like shopping and many jobs have adjusted by now as best as they could to these new circumstances. And I'm sure that buffets, even though their very essence is kind of contradictory to what we have to deal with now, their mark that they've already left on American culture already prevents them from being wiped out completely.
Buffets have dominated American culture for a long time, but because of new health safety standards and COVID especially, they could fade into obscurity. The solution? New business models like having servers serving customers instead of serving themselves could help, even if they aren't super popular. What matters most is whether or not customers will trust buffets after COVID, even if they change drastically. But knowing Americans, buffets might not be leaving for a long, long time.
Thank you for tuning to this week's episode of Spoonable Standpoint. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at spoonable_standpoint for our latest updates, link to our website, and other bonus content. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to share it. We release a new episode every other Friday, and we hope to see you there.